Hey guys, welcome back to another Planet Mithril Paints, and today we are painting the old metal sculpt of King Theoden from the Warg Attack box. An absolute classic model which really gives you a chance to experiment with some rich greens, reds and really vibrant colours, and it looks great on the tabletop when finished. We're also going to give you a little bit of a basic guide as how to paint white horses. So I hope you enjoy, and we'll see you at the end of the video. Start by base coating the face and lips with Bugman's Glow. Don't worry about being too neat with the hair at this point, any slips will be sorted when we start painting that. Layer over with a 50-50 mix of Bugman's Glow and Kaolian Flesh Tone. Once the wash is dry, re-layer with the previous mix, leaving the Richness flesh shade showing in the recesses. Layer over again with pure Kaolian Flesh Tone, further pushing the definition between the face layers. Highlight with a mix of Kaolian Flesh Tone and Pallid Witch Flesh. Concentrate on the forehead and the wrinkle lines, as well as the eyes and eyelids, to create a slightly worn look to Theoden's face. Add more Pallid Witch Flesh for the final extreme edge highlight around the forehead, eyelids and tips of the nose. Now you can also paint in the eyes with Abaddon Black and Pallid Witch Flesh if you feel comfortable doing so. We want to tie Theoden in as much as possible with normal warriors of Rohan, while still maintaining his kingly appearance. One way to do this is with the hair. To start off the rich colour of the Rohan king's hair, base coat it and his beard with Steel Legion Drab. To accentuate the richness from an early stage, apply a layer with a mix of Steel Legion Drab and the Messy Desert. Once the wash is dry, reapply the previous mix over the entire scalp and beard. Now you want to focus on picking out individual hairs and patches of the most pronounced areas of hair. For the first highlight stage, add 30% Pallid Witch Flesh to the previous Steel Legions and Messy mix, and carefully pick out every individual hair across his head, as well as marking in the strands of beard hair over his chin and moustache. Add more Pallid Witch Flesh to the mix for the final highlight stages. Now you just want to focus on Theoden's crown, the tips and more pronounced curls of his hair, and the tips of his beard and moustache. Base coat Theoden's tunic with a 50-50 mix of Rhinox hide and Mournfang brown. The Rhinox provides a darkness to the shade, whereas the Mournfang creates a richness which will benefit the finished tunic. Layer over the tunic by adding in more Mournfang brown, bringing the mix to an approximate 75-25% split. Add a highlight of Scrag brown. Start to concentrate on the more pronounced areas of material, leaving the recesses still darkened with the previous layer. Highlight with a 50-50 mix of Scrag brown and Deathclaw brown. The Deathclaw does appear quite flesh tinted on its own, but again will help accentuate the richness of the tunic and complements well with the Scrag brown combined. Finally, apply an extreme edge highlight across the whole tunic with Deathclaw brown. Focus on the uppermost folds and edges of material to create the impression of natural light. Theoden's cloak en route to Helm's Deep is a slightly different shade to that of the rest of his Rohirrim kinsmen. To portray this, we're going to be using a slightly unorthodox mix of paints, but stick with this because the finished result really works. Start off by base coating his cloak with a 75-25% mix of Caliban green and Rhinox hide. This gives a very earthy look to the cloak overall, while still maintaining that richness we want to continue. Layer over by adding approximately 25% warpstone glow to the previous Caliban Rhinox mix. Once the wash is dried, reapply the previous mix over the whole cloak. Here, like the tunic, you now want to focus on creating definition between the folds of material and blocking out some of the larger areas of cloth. Add more warpstone glow to the mix for the next highlight stage. Again, focus on pushing the definition between the upper and inner folds of the cloak to create natural shadow and depth. Next, use warpstone glow for the next highlight stage. Keep your highlights cleaner and tighter to further push the definition. For the next highlight, apply a mix made up of an approximate 50-50 split of warpstone glow and snarsnake green. Now you want to apply this as an extreme edge highlight to the uppermost fold of the cloak to further push the contrast between the deep green in the recesses and the lighter, slightly off green of the tips. We then applied one final highlight by adding a bit more snarsening to the mix to push the definition even further. We didn't show this here, mainly for time constraints, and it was a personal choice for our Theoden. If you wish to apply this layer, just repeat the previous process by making the highlights as tight and as neat as you possibly can. Red and green, who'd have thought that would go together, but Theoden makes it work. To base coat the inner robes, we use a mix of corn red and rhinox hide, again adding the rhinox here to accentuate the earthy tone we're after. Layer over by adding 50% Evil Sun Scarlet to the previous mix. When painting the robes by Theoden's neck, be extremely careful here not to clip either his beard or the tunic. Apply a highlight by increasing the amount of Evil Sun Scarlet in the mix to an approximate 75-25% split. It will be challenging here to create definition over his arms, as there aren't a lot of defined material folds, but take your time and try to picture where the material might flow were you yourself to hold your arm in that position. For the next two stages, we highlighted with a mix of Evil Suns and Fire Dragon Bright, adding an increasing amount of Fire Dragon Bright to the mix for each successive highlight. The gloves, all the straps and belts were painted with dried bark. Next, edge highlight all these carefully with a fine edge highlight of Gauthor brown, taking time to highlight the knuckles and create definition over the hand. Carefully pick out the hilt of Harugrim to trim around Theoden's tunic and gloves with Runelord brass. If it helps, you can mark out these areas with a very thin line of Abaddon black beforehand, as we did. Make sure your brush has a very thin point for this, as any spill ups now will bleed over onto the tunic, which we do not want to happen. Edge highlight the gold areas with Sycorax bronze. Another note here, it's not crucial to wash the trims around the tunic and the gloves, but if you do, be extremely careful again, as bleeding over wash will upset the coloration around these parts of the browns. Base coat the sword blade with lead belcher. Highlight the blade edge with Runefang steel. The boots and lower robes were painted with a mix of Abaddon black and Storm Vermin fur. These were then highlighted with pure Storm Vermin fur. And with that, Theoden himself is done. Now on to the trickier bits. White horses can be notoriously difficult to paint and paint effectively. In this guide we're hopefully going to show you an effective way to paint a white horse to a good standard which won't make you want to pull your hair out. To start off with, base coat the entire horse with a thinned down Celestra Grey. This has a slight bluey hue to it which really helps push the progression to white later on. You will want to apply this in a few thinned down layers in order to achieve a smooth finish overall. Tempting though it is to get it done in one thick coat, the model will suffer as a result of this. Make sure to wait for the previous layer to dry before applying a second or third coat of Celestra Grey. Now that the wash is dried, we're going to layer over the horse's body with a 50-50 mix of Celestra Grey and Uthwan Grey. The reason we kept the wash so thin is because we didn't want to necessarily tone down the horse, merely provide the impression of shaded musculature and help give us a guide as to where to apply the next layers to create natural definition. Again, as with the Celestra, you want to apply this in a few thin coats. Once dry, you can then apply another layer of pure Ulthuan over the horse's body to further accentuate the muscular detail, again focusing on the upper and outermost areas of the horse's shape. We didn't show this here, but you can see where we applied this in the final stage. Finally, now apply an edge highlight of white scar around the most pronounced areas of musculature. Try and keep the flow of the model smooth by not making these highlights too harsh. Use the definition of the horse's body as a guide to where these should all be applied. Paint the straps, bridle and horse dressing by Theoden's legs with dried bark. Next, carefully edge highlight, as we did for Theoden's belts and gloves, all these areas with Gorthor brown, taking care to separate each part of the pattern down the sides of the horse. Paint the outside straps of Snowmane with scrag brown. This helps to differentiate from the rest of the leathers, but still ties in nicely with Theoden himself, as we use scrag brown across his tunic. Then highlight these areas with pure Deathclaw brown. The gold areas were painted exactly the same as on Theoden himself, with Runelord brass and Sycorax bronze respectively. This helped just to tie the model together as a whole a bit more. Paint the horse's mane, tail and small areas of cloth by the inside of Theoden's legs with a mix of Abaddon black and storm vermin fur. Next, highlight the cloth with pure storm vermin fur and apply a light, careful dry brush of storm vermin to the horse's hair. Finally, pick out any small metallic details left on the horse with lead belcher. These details are minute, so there's no need to highlight them further at this point.